My sister pushed me out of my wheelchair at our family reunion. Stop faking for attention, everyone laughed as I lay on the ground. What they didn't know was that my doctor was standing right behind them. She cleared her throat and said 5 words that ended everything. The concrete felt cold against my cheek. I could hear my sister Lindsay's voice somewhere above me, sharp and triumphant. See? He's fine. All this chronic pain nonsense is just an act. Laughter rippled through the crowd. My Aunt Rachel's high-pitched giggle cut through everything else. I recognized my cousin Marcus's deep chuckle, Uncle Tom's wheezing snort. The people who'd known me my entire life were watching me sprawled on the ground, and they were amused. I'd arrived at the reunion 20 minutes earlier. My parents hosted it every year at their house in suburban Pennsylvania, transforming their backyard into a staging ground for competitive small talk and passive-aggressive commentary disguised as concern. This year marked the 15th anniversary of these gatherings, and Mom had gone all out with catering, a rented sound system, and matching tablecloths. Lindsay had been circling me since I rolled through the gate. She'd made comments about my wheelchair being a bit much and asked loudly whether I'd considered just pushing through it like people used to do before everyone became so sensitive. I'd ignored her. 3 years of physical therapy had taught me patience, if nothing else. But then she'd positioned herself behind me while I was talking to our cousin Sarah about her new job. One moment I was nodding along, the next I felt hands on my shoulders and the world tilted. The wheelchair shot backward and I pitched forward, hitting the patio with enough force to knock the wind from my lungs. That's what I thought, Lindsay announced. Total faker. I focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. My physical therapist Monica had taught me techniques for managing pain flares, and humiliation apparently triggered the same response as overexertion. My lower back screamed. My left hip felt like someone had driven a spike through the joint. Lindsay, that's enough. My mother's voice carried across the patio, but it lacked conviction. She'd been doubting my condition for months, ever since she'd seen me stand up to reach something on a high shelf at Thanksgiving. Never mind that I'd explained 100 times that wheelchair users aren't always completely unable to walk. Never mind the medical documentation, the x-rays showing the degenerative disc disease, the reports from 3 separate specialists. Is it though? Lindsay's shoes appeared in my limited field of vision. Red heels, probably the ones she'd bought for her promotion celebration. He's been milking this for attention since the accident. Meanwhile, the rest of us have actual problems. The accident. She made it sound like I'd staged a minor fender bender for sympathy points. In reality, an 18-wheeler had T-boned my sedan at an intersection 3 years ago. The driver had been texting. My car had spun twice before slamming into a light pole. I'd spent 4 days unconscious, 2 months in the hospital, and the following year learning how to exist with chronic pain that ranged from bearable to absolutely incapacitating. Should someone help him up? This from my cousin Jamie, who sounded more curious than concerned. He can do it himself if he really needs to, Lindsay said. Watch. Hey Danny, need a hand? Or are you going to keep playing the victim? I managed to push myself up onto my elbows. The movement sent fresh agony radiating from my spine, but I'd learned to keep my face neutral. Showing pain only gave Lindsay ammunition. She'd accuse me of being dramatic, of exaggerating for effect. That's what I figured. She was walking away now, addressing the crowd. He's been manipulating everyone for years. Using that chair like a prop, getting special treatment, making everything about his supposed suffering. Meanwhile, I've been working 60-hour weeks trying to make partner at my firm, and does anyone care? No, because St. Daniel and his tragic injury take up all the oxygen in every room. More laughter. Quieter now, uncomfortable, but still there. I recognized the sound of people who wanted to believe they weren't being cruel, that they were just acknowledging an uncomfortable truth someone had finally been brave enough to speak aloud. I got my knees under me. The world swam. I'd left my pain medication in my wheelchair's storage bag, which had tipped over when Lindsay shoved it. Pills had scattered across the patio. Oh, look at that, Lindsay said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. Even brought pills for the performance. What are those, Danny? Tic Tacs? Or did you find a doctor willing to prescribe actual medication for your imaginary condition? Those are hydrocodone, said a voice I recognized. And they're very much necessary for managing his condition. The patio went silent. Dr. Elizabeth Chen stood near the gate, holding a covered dish. She'd been my pain management specialist for 18 months, guiding me through medication trials, injection treatments, and countless discussions about quality of life versus side effects. She was also, apparently, a friend of my Aunt Rachel from their college days. Rachel had mentioned inviting an old roommate to the reunion, but I hadn't connected the dots. I'm sorry, Lindsay said, her tone shifting from mocking to defensive in an instant. Who are you? I'm Daniel's neurologist. Dr. Chen walked forward, setting her dish on the nearest table. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a blue blouse, but something about her posture commanded attention. And I've been treating him for severe chronic pain resulting from traumatic spinal injury for the past year and a half. My mother appeared at Lindsay's shoulder. Elizabeth? Rachel said you were coming, but I didn't realize you were Danny's doctor. I treat his condition, yes. Dr. Chen's voice was calm, clinical. Which makes what I just witnessed particularly disturbing. Lindsay, is it? My sister nodded. The red had drained from her face. You just physically assaulted a patient with documented spinal instability and multiple herniated discs. You forcibly removed him from an assistive medical device and caused him to impact concrete on his anterior torso. Given the laughter I heard, I'm assuming you and others here believe Daniel's condition is somehow fabricated or exaggerated? Nobody spoke. Let me be clear. Dr. Chen crouched next to me, checking my pupils and pulse with practiced efficiency. Daniel has L4, L5 and L5S1 disc herniations with nerve impingement. He has chronic inflammation of the sacroiliac joint. His pain levels on a bad day are comparable to what most people would experience with a kidney stone, except his pain is constant. He uses a wheelchair because prolonged standing or walking can trigger spasms that leave him completely immobilized. None of this is optional. None of this is exaggerated. And attacking him physically could have resulted in permanent paralysis. She helped me sit up properly, moving with careful precision. The pain had settled into a deep, throbbing ache. I'd be feeling this for days. I need to examine you, she said quietly. Can you make it inside? I nodded. She helped me stand, one arm around my waist, and guided me toward the house. Behind us, the silence stretched. I glanced back once and saw my sister standing frozen, surrounded by relatives who suddenly couldn't meet her eyes. Mom appeared in the doorway. Elizabeth, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. We'll talk later, Dr. Chen said. Right now I need to make sure your son doesn't require emergency treatment. She led me to the downstairs guest room and closed the door. The examination took 15 minutes. She tested my reflexes, had me rate my pain levels, checked for any acute injuries beyond the bruising I could already feel forming. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed and studied me. How often does this happen? She asked. The physical assault? That was new. The dismissal. The accusations of faking. I leaned back against the pillows. Lindsay's been the worst since the accident. But it's not just her. People see me stand up to grab something and they assume the wheelchair is optional. They don't understand that I can walk short distances on good days, but that doesn't mean I don't need the chair. They think pain is supposed to be visible. Your family doesn't believe you. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. My mom wavers. She wants to believe me, but Lindsay's very convincing. Dad just doesn't want to deal with family drama. Everyone else takes their cues from Lindsay. She's always been the golden child. Successful, confident, says what everyone else is thinking. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone. Do you have a lawyer? The question startled me. What? For the accident. You mentioned an 18-wheeler. That's significant liability. I had one. The case settled 2 years ago. The trucking company's insurance paid out, but most of it went to medical bills. What I have left covers my treatments and modifications to my apartment. She nodded slowly. And today? Does Lindsay understand she just committed assault on video? I blinked. Video? Your Aunt Rachel was recording. She told me earlier she was documenting the whole reunion for a family slideshow. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. That means there's clear footage of Lindsay attacking you, you hitting the ground, and everyone laughing while you were injured. The implications took a moment to sink in. I don't want to sue my sister, I'm not suggesting you should. But you need to understand what just happened. She didn't just hurt you physically. She publicly humiliated you and attempted to delegitimize your medical condition in front of your entire family. That has consequences. I closed my eyes. My hip throbbed. My back felt like someone had taken a hammer to the vertebrae. And underneath the physical pain was something deeper, something that had been building for 3 years. The exhaustion of constantly defending my reality. The loneliness of being doubted by people who supposedly loved me. The anger at having my suffering treated as a character flaw. What do I do? I asked. Dr. Chen stood. First, you rest. I'm going to talk to your mother and explain exactly what your condition entails. Then I'm going to strongly suggest that Lindsay apologize and that your family educate themselves on chronic pain. If they're unwilling to do that, I'd recommend limiting contact with people who actively harm your recovery. She left. I lay in the guest room listening to muffled voices through the door. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke to my mother sitting in the chair beside the bed. Danny. Her voice was soft. I'm sorry. I waited. Elizabeth explained everything. She showed me your medical files, the imaging results, the treatment plans. I didn't realize how serious it was. I thought maybe you were just being cautious, maybe overdoing the precautions. I didn't understand. I told you, I said. Multiple times. I showed you the same files Dr. Chen just showed you. The difference is that you believe her because she's a doctor and you didn't believe me because I'm your son who you think you know better than any medical professional. Mom flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? Lindsay's been telling everyone I'm faking for months. She's made jokes about my medication, my wheelchair, my limitations. And you never once told her to stop. You let her narrative become the family truth. I didn't know what to believe, Mom said. You seemed fine sometimes. I'd see you moving around normally and I'd think maybe it wasn't as bad as you claimed. That's how chronic conditions work. I have good days and bad days. The wheelchair isn't a prison, it's a tool that lets me conserve energy so I don't spend 3 days in bed after going grocery shopping. But because my pain isn't visible every second of every day, you decided it wasn't real. She was crying now. What do you want me to do? I thought about that. What did I want? An apology felt hollow. Understanding felt like too much to ask. 3 years of doubt couldn't be erased with a single conversation. I want you to listen to me the same way you listen to my doctors, I finally said. I want Lindsay to face actual consequences for assaulting me instead of everyone just moving on because confrontation is uncomfortable. And I want you to acknowledge that your lack of belief has made the past 3 years significantly harder than they needed to be. Mom nodded. She reached for my hand, then stopped herself. Elizabeth suggested family therapy. She knows someone who specializes in helping families navigate chronic illness. Would you be willing to try? Only if everyone commits. Not just me showing up to be analyzed while everyone else nods along and then goes back to their assumptions. I'll talk to everyone, Mom promised. She stood, hesitated. Lindsay left. She said she needed space to think. But I told her she's not welcome back until she apologizes to you properly. After Mom left, I lay in the quiet and tried to process everything. Dr. Chen's intervention had shifted the narrative, but I didn't know if it would stick. People were skilled at reverting to comfortable patterns. Give it a few weeks and Lindsay would probably find a way to spin herself as the victim, misunderstood and unfairly attacked for speaking an uncomfortable truth. My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I should have. Are you okay? Then another from Marcus. That was messed up. Lindsay went too far. Hope you're all right. Slowly, steadily, individual messages trickled in. Not everyone, but enough. People who'd stood silent were now reaching out privately, offering support they hadn't been willing to show publicly. It felt like too little, too late. But it was something. Dr. Chen checked on me before she left the reunion. How are you feeling? Like I got pushed out of a wheelchair. She smiled slightly. Your mother asked me to send over information about chronic pain support groups. I'm also going to write a detailed letter explaining your condition that you can share with family members if you choose. Some people need official documentation before they'll accept reality. Thank you, I said. For speaking up. You didn't have to. Actually, I did. Her expression was serious. I watched a patient with a documented medical condition get physically assaulted while people laughed. That's not something I can ignore professionally or personally. Beyond that, I've been treating you long enough to know you don't advocate for yourself the way you should. Someone needed to do it. After she left, I managed to get myself into my wheelchair and out to where Dad was cleaning up. The reunion had apparently ended early. Most of the food sat untouched on the tables. Need help? Dad asked. I'm fine. We worked in silence for a while, him collecting plates and cups, me gathering napkins and disposing of trash I could reach without standing. Finally, Dad spoke. I owe you an apology too. I took the easy road. Let your mother and Lindsay dominate the conversation about your health because I didn't want to deal with the conflict. That was wrong. I nodded. Yeah, it was. Your sister has always been intense. Competitive, driven, convinced she has to be the best at everything. When you had the accident and needed help, needed attention, I think she saw it as you taking something from her. That doesn't excuse what she did today, but it might explain it. I don't need her psychology explained, I said. I need her to acknowledge that she hurt me and stop treating my medical condition like a personal insult to her achievements. Dad set down the plates he was holding. You're right. I'll talk to her. Make sure she understands this isn't negotiable. I went home that evening exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. My apartment felt quiet, safe. I took my medication, ran through my evening stretches, and collapsed into bed. The next morning brought an email from Lindsay. No subject line, just a wall of text that started with I've been thinking about yesterday and evolved into explanations about stress at work and feeling overshadowed and not realizing how serious my condition was. The word sorry appeared once, buried in the middle, qualified by if I went too far. I deleted it. 3 days later, a second email arrived. Shorter this time. I assaulted you. There's no excuse for that. I let my resentment turn into cruelty and I hurt you when you were already hurting. I'm sorry. I understand if you don't want to forgive me. Better, but still insufficient. I didn't respond. The following week, a package arrived. Inside was a book about chronic pain, sticky notes marking specific passages, and a handwritten letter. Lindsay's handwriting, usually precise and controlled, looked shaky. "Danny, I read this entire book. I thought I understood pain because I pulled an all-nighter and my back hurt, or I worked out too hard and was sore for days. I didn't understand that what you experience is fundamentally different. It's not something you can push through or overcome with willpower. It's not a choice. I made your suffering about me and my insecurities, and that was unforgivable. I'm starting therapy. Not to make you forgive me, but because I need to figure out why I responded to your pain with cruelty instead of compassion. I love you. I'm sorry. I'll wait as long as it takes." I called her that evening. She answered on the first ring. "Thank you for the book," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "It's not enough. I know that." "No," I agreed. "But it's a start." We talked for an hour. She cried. I didn't. I was still too angry, too raw. But I listened as she explained her spiral of resentment, how seeing me struggle had somehow triggered every insecurity she'd buried under professional success. How she'd convinced herself I was exaggerating because accepting the reality meant acknowledging that terrible things happened to people who didn't deserve them, and that was terrifying. "I wanted it to be fake," she admitted. "Because if you were really suffering that much, it meant the world was crueler than I wanted to believe. It meant someone I loved was in pain I couldn't fix. So I made it about manipulation and attention seeking instead. I created a narrative where you were the problem so I didn't have to face my own helplessness." "That's honest," I said. "But it doesn't undo the damage." "I know. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I just need you to know I understand what I did and why it was wrong." We left it there. No promises of reconciliation, no declarations of forgiveness. Just an acknowledgement that we'd both been changed by what happened at the reunion. Mom scheduled the family therapy sessions Dr. Chen recommended. The first one was brutal. Lindsay and I sat in chairs facing each other while a therapist named Dr. Patricia Morgan guided us through a conversation about betrayal, ableism, and family dynamics. Mom cried through most of it. Dad looked uncomfortable but stayed present. The second session included extended family. Aunt Rachel, Uncle Tom, cousins Marcus and Sarah. Dr. Morgan had them watch the video from the reunion, the one Rachel had recorded. Watching it on the therapist's screen, seeing myself hit the ground from a third-person perspective, hearing the laughter that had surrounded me, I felt something crack open in my chest. "This is what Daniel experienced," Dr. Morgan said, pausing the video on an image of me on the ground, my face twisted in pain. "Physical assault. Public humiliation. Dismissal of his medical reality. And laughter. Now I want each of you to imagine being in his position. Imagine everyone you love finding your suffering amusing." The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. "I didn't realize," Marcus said finally. "I heard Lindsay say he was faking and I just went along with it. I didn't even think about whether it was true. I'm sorry, Danny." Others followed. Apologies and explanations and a lot of discomfort. Dr. Morgan pushed them to sit with that discomfort, to understand that their momentary unease was nothing compared to 3 years of being doubted and dismissed. The sessions continued weekly for 2 months. Slowly, incrementally, things shifted. Lindsay started calling to check on me, asking about my pain levels without judgment. Mom learned to distinguish between good days and bad days, to understand that just because I could do something once didn't mean I could do it always. Dad began researching chronic pain management, sending me articles and studies, trying to educate himself on what I lived with. The extended family remained mixed. Some people committed to understanding. Others stayed polite but distant, probably still harboring doubts they were now too uncomfortable to voice. I learned to accept that. Some people would never fully believe me, and that was their limitation, not mine. 6 months after the reunion, Lindsay invited me to dinner at her apartment. She'd cooked, something she rarely did, and the table was set with care. We ate and talked about ordinary things. Her work, my physical therapy progress, a movie we'd both seen. "I'm glad you came," she said as I was leaving. "Me too. Does this mean you forgive me?" I considered that. "I think it means I'm willing to move forward. Forgiveness might take longer. But I believe you're genuinely trying to change, and that matters." She nodded. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." A year after the reunion, our family gathered again. Same house, same yard, but the atmosphere felt different. People asked about my health without skepticism. Someone had set up a ramp over the patio steps without being asked. When I mentioned needing to rest, 3 people immediately offered to help me inside. Lindsay stayed close but not suffocating. She'd learned to read my signals, to recognize when I was managing pain versus when I needed intervention. At one point, when I shifted uncomfortably in my wheelchair, she quietly asked if I needed anything. "I'm okay," I said. "Just stiff. Let me know if that changes." Dr. Chen came to this reunion too, as Rachel's guest again. She found me near the end of the evening. "How are you doing?" she asked. Better than last year. She smiled. I can see that. Your family seems different. They're trying. It's not perfect, but it's better. That's all anyone can ask for. Growth, not perfection. As the sun set and relatives started leaving, Mom found me. Thank you for coming, she said. I know last year was traumatic. I'm glad you gave us another chance. I'm glad things changed, I said. But Mom, you need to understand something. What happened last year wasn't just about Lindsay pushing me. It was about years of subtle dismissal, of having to prove my pain was real, of being treated like my suffering was somehow negotiable. The reunion was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. I know, Mom said quietly. I think about that a lot. How many times you tried to tell me and I didn't listen. I can't undo that, but I promise I'm listening now. Lindsay appeared as I was packing up to leave. Drive safe, she said. Text me when you get home? I will. She hesitated. I'm proud of you. For everything. For surviving the accident, for dealing with all of this, for giving me another chance when you had every right not to. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Strength isn't a choice when you don't have alternatives, I said. But I appreciate it. Going home, I thought about how much had changed. The physical pain hadn't disappeared. I still had bad days that left me bedridden, still had to carefully manage my energy and medication. But the emotional isolation had lessened. My family had learned to see past their assumptions. They'd educated themselves on my condition and adjusted their expectations. It wasn't a perfect ending. Lindsay and I would never fully return to how we were before the accident. Too much had happened, too much hurt had accumulated. But we'd found a new equilibrium, built on honesty instead of performance. The following month, I started attending a chronic pain support group Dr. Chen had recommended. Sitting in a circle with other people who understood invisible suffering, who didn't need convincing or explaining, felt like breathing after being underwater. We shared coping strategies and frustrations and dark humor about the absurdity of trying to function in a world designed for able-bodied people. One evening, a new member joined. She looked nervous, perched on the edge of her chair like she might bolt. During introductions, she explained she'd been in a car accident 6 months ago and was dealing with chronic back pain. Her family thought she was exaggerating. My sister keeps telling me I'm making it worse by focusing on it, she said, voice shaking. She says I should just be grateful I survived and stop complaining. I caught her eye. I know exactly what that's like. It gets better. Not easier, but better. After the meeting, she approached me. How did you deal with your family not believing you? I thought about the reunion, about Lindsay's hands on my shoulders and the cold concrete against my face. About Dr. Chen's intervention and the long path from that moment to now. Eventually someone spoke up who they couldn't dismiss, I said. But even before that, I had to decide to believe in my own reality regardless of whether they validated it. That's the hardest part. Trusting your own experience when everyone around you questions it. She nodded slowly. I'm tired of explaining myself. You shouldn't have to. The people who love you should listen the first time. Over the following months, I watched her find her footing in the group. She reminded me of myself in those early days after the accident, desperately wanting someone to acknowledge her pain was real. The group gave her that. We all gave each other that. Lindsay came to one of my physical therapy sessions, asking if she could observe. Monica, my therapist, checked with me first. I agreed. Watching Lindsay's face as Monica guided me through exercises designed to manage pain rather than cure it, seeing her realize how much work went into maintaining basic functionality, something shifted between us. Afterward, in the parking lot, Lindsay said, I had no idea. Watching you work that hard just to maintain where you are, not even to improve, just to not get worse. I didn't understand. I tried to tell you. I know. I'm sorry I needed to see it to believe it. We stood there in the afternoon sun, two siblings who'd been close once and then hadn't been and now were cautiously finding our way back. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before my accident, but it was real in ways the old one hadn't been. Built on acknowledgement of hard truths instead of comfortable assumptions. By the time the second anniversary of that reunion arrived, I'd made peace with several things. My family would never fully understand my experience, but they'd learned to trust me about it. Lindsay had done genuine work to address her issues and change her behavior. Some extended family members remained skeptical, but I'd stopped needing their validation. The chronic pain support group had become central to my life. I'd started co-facilitating sessions, helping new members navigate the emotional terrain of invisible illness. In helping them advocate for themselves, I'd learned to do the same more effectively. Dr. Chen and I had developed a treatment plan that wasn't about cure but about management, about maximizing quality of life within realistic parameters. She'd become more than my doctor. She was an advocate who understood that medical care extended beyond prescriptions and procedures to include validation and education. The reunion that year felt almost normal. People asked about my health the way they'd ask about a job or hobby, genuine interest without interrogation. Lindsay and I spent time together without the tension that had defined our relationship for years. Mom had stopped trying to fix things and learned to simply be present. Near the end of the evening, I found myself alone on the patio where I'd fallen 2 years earlier. The space held different meaning now. Not trauma exactly, but a marker of change. The worst moment had catalyzed transformation in ways I couldn't have predicted. Dad joined me. Thinking about last time? Some, I admitted. Mostly thinking about how different this feels. Your mother and I talked about that. How close we came to losing you. Not physically, but emotionally. You could have cut us all off after what happened and no one would have blamed you. I thought about it, I said honestly. But then what? I'd be right about being wronged, but I'd also be alone. This way is harder, but it's less lonely. I'm grateful you gave us the chance to do better, Dad said. Not everyone would have. After everyone left, I helped Mom clean up. She moved around the kitchen with familiar efficiency, wrapping leftovers and loading the dishwasher. You seem happy, she observed. I am. As much as anyone is happy while dealing with chronic pain. I've learned to separate my worth from my suffering. They coexist, but they don't define each other. Mom set down the dish she was holding. I wish I'd understood that earlier. I kept waiting for you to be better before I could be happy for you. I didn't realize you were building a life anyway, despite everything. I didn't realize it either for a long time, I admitted. I was so focused on trying to get back to who I was before the accident that I missed the chance to figure out who I could be after it. The reunion forced that reckoning. 3 years after the accident, 5 years total since that day with the 18-wheeler, I'd built a life that accommodated my limitations without being defined by them. I worked remotely in web design, which let me manage my energy. I had a support system that understood chronic pain. My family had learned to listen. Lindsay and I met for coffee regularly now. She'd tell me about her cases, the stress of partnership track. I'd tell her about my design projects, the challenges of managing client expectations while dealing with unpredictable pain flares. We existed in each other's lives as full people, not just through the lens of injury and resentment. I think about that reunion a lot, she said one afternoon. Not just because I'm ashamed of what I did, though I am. But because it taught me something about myself I needed to know. About how easy it is to dismiss other people's suffering when acknowledging it requires you to sit with discomfort. Most people never learn that lesson, I said. They go their whole lives avoiding anything that challenges their comfort. I almost did. If Dr. Chen hadn't been there, if she hadn't forced everyone to confront what I'd done, I probably would have doubled down. Convinced myself I was right and you were manipulative. I don't like thinking about who I might have become. But you didn't become that person. That's what matters. She smiled slightly. You're more forgiving than I deserve. I'm not forgiving. I'm just choosing to focus on who you are now instead of who you were then. There's a difference. The chronic pain support group continued to be central to my life. We'd grown to 15 regular members, meeting weekly to share strategies and frustrations and small victories. I'd started a blog about living with invisible disability, writing about the daily navigation of a world that expected suffering to be visible and quantifiable. The response surprised me. Hundreds of people reaching out with their own stories, thanking me for articulating experiences they'd struggled to explain. The isolation I'd felt for so long wasn't unique. Thousands of people were fighting similar battles against dismissal and disbelief. One reader, a woman named Jennifer from Ohio, sent me an email that arrived at 2 a.m. She'd been crying, she said, because she'd finally found words for what she'd been experiencing since a workplace injury left her with nerve damage. Her employer questioned whether she really needed accommodations. Her friends had stopped inviting her places because she always had an excuse. Reading my blog made her feel less alone, less crazy, less like maybe she really was exaggerating. I responded immediately, despite the late hour. Told her about the support group, about resources for workplace discrimination, about the importance of finding medical professionals who believed her. We exchanged emails for weeks. She eventually found a pain management specialist who took her seriously, filed a complaint with Human Resources that resulted in proper accommodations, and joined a local support group. 6 months later, she sent me a photo from her first pain-free day in 2 years. She was smiling, standing in her kitchen making breakfast, and the caption read, "Thank you for teaching me that advocating for myself isn't selfish." Stories like hers became common. The blog had evolved from personal catharsis into something larger, a resource hub where people could find validation and practical advice. I interviewed other chronic pain patients, shared research about new treatments, compiled lists of questions to ask doctors when seeking diagnosis. My web design business had grown alongside the blog. Clients appreciated my attention to accessibility, my understanding of how design choices affected users with disabilities. I specialized in creating websites that worked for everyone, not just the able-bodied. The work felt meaningful in ways my pre-accident career never had. I used the platform to educate. Explained the difference between acute and chronic pain. Detailed what wheelchair use actually meant for someone with my condition. Pushed back against inspiration narratives that treated disability as something to overcome rather than accommodate. The blog attracted attention from medical professionals too. Dr. Chen shared my posts with her other patients. Physical therapists used my articles as educational materials for family members who didn't understand chronic conditions. A rehabilitation center in Boston invited me to speak at their annual conference about the patient perspective on pain management. Standing at that podium, looking out at a room full of healthcare providers, I thought about how far I'd come from the man lying on concrete while his family laughed. Public speaking exhausted me, required careful energy management and strategic medication timing. But the opportunity to influence how doctors approached invisible disability felt too important to pass up. Belief is medicine, I told the audience. Before you prescribe anything, before you order tests or recommend treatments, give your patients the medicine of being believed. It won't cure them, but it will allow them to stop fighting for validation and start fighting for healing. The speech was well received. Afterward, a young resident approached me with tears in her eyes. My mother has fibromyalgia, she said. I've watched doctors dismiss her for years. I became a doctor partly to make sure I never do that to anyone. Thank you for putting words to why it matters. These moments accumulated. Small changes, individual conversations, incremental shifts in understanding. I wasn't curing chronic pain or revolutionizing medical care. But I was creating space for people to exist as they were, to have their reality acknowledged without having to prove it constantly. The support group members had become like family. We celebrated each other's victories, mourned together when pain won, shared dark humor that outsiders would find disturbing but we found essential. When Marcus, one of our longest-standing members, finally got approved for disability benefits after 3 years of denials, we held a celebration that felt more meaningful than any party I'd attended before the accident. I couldn't have done this without you all, Marcus said, voice thick with emotion. Every time I wanted to give up, to stop fighting, I'd come here and remember I wasn't alone. That sense of community extended beyond our weekly meetings. We had a group text where people could reach out during bad pain days. We organized meal trains when someone was too immobilized to cook. We attended medical appointments together when someone needed moral support facing a skeptical doctor. I brought Lindsay to one of our meetings, with the group's permission. She'd sat quietly, listening as people shared experiences that mirrored mine. Hearing strangers describe the same dismissals, the same accusations of exaggeration, the same exhaustion of constant justification, seemed to cement something for her. I thought your situation was unique, she admitted afterward. I didn't realize chronic pain came with this whole package of social isolation and disbelief. Hearing it from multiple people, seeing how common these experiences are, it makes me sick thinking about how I contributed to that for you. She'd asked how she could help. I suggested she volunteer at the awareness walks we organized, help with fundraising for accessible housing initiatives, share blog posts that might educate others. She did all of it, throwing herself into advocacy with the same intensity she brought to her legal career. Watching her distribute pamphlets about invisible disabilities at a community health fair, I felt something shift. The sister who'd pushed me out of my wheelchair had become an ally, someone who used her privilege and platforms to amplify voices that often went unheard. The transformation wasn't complete, wasn't perfect, but it was real. Mom started reading the blog. She'd mention posts during our weekly phone calls, asking questions or sharing what she'd learned. Dad sent articles he'd found about new pain management research. They were trying, genuinely and persistently, to understand. The fourth family reunion after the incident felt almost routine. No drama, no tension. Just relatives gathering, eating, talking. Lindsay helped me navigate the buffet line without making a production of it. Cousins asked about my work with casual interest. Aunt Rachel showed me videos from the support group awareness walk she'd participated in. As evening approached and people started leaving, Dr. Chen found me again. She'd become a regular at these gatherings, integrated into the family fabric. Every year I come to these, I'm reminded why I do what I do, she said. Watching your family learn and change, seeing you build a life that works for you, it matters. Medical care isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about helping people exist in the world as they are, not as others think they should be. Thank you, I said. For everything. For speaking up that day, for the continued treatment, for being the kind of doctor who sees patients as people. Thank you for being the kind of patient who keeps fighting even when it would be easier to give up. After she left, I sat alone on the patio, watching the sun set through the trees. The space where I'd fallen years ago held no power over me anymore. It was just concrete, just space. The meaning I'd given it had transformed from trauma to catalyst to simply history. Lindsay appeared with 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed me one and sat in the chair beside my wheelchair. Thinking deep thoughts? She asked. Thinking about how much has changed. How different this is from 4 years ago. Better different? Yeah. Harder in some ways, but better. More honest. We sat in comfortable silence, siblings who'd hurt each other and healed, who'd lost trust and rebuilt it on sturdier foundations. The journey from that terrible reunion to this peaceful evening had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. As darkness settled and the last guest departed, I prepared to leave. Mom hugged me at the door, holding on a moment longer than usual. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For surviving, for thriving, for teaching all of us to be better." "I'm proud of you too," I replied. "For being willing to learn, to change, to do the hard work of questioning your assumptions." Driving home through familiar streets, I thought about the woman from the support group, the one who'd asked how I dealt with family disbelief. I should tell her this story. Not as a guarantee that everything would work out, but as evidence that change was possible. That people could learn, could grow, could choose compassion over comfort. The accident had taken a lot from me. Mobility, certainty, the easy assumption that my body would do what I asked of it. But it had given me things too. Clarity about who genuinely cared. Understanding of my own resilience. Appreciation for the moments when pain receded enough to let joy in. I wouldn't choose to go through it again. The years of suffering, the isolation, the humiliation of that reunion. But I also couldn't deny that the person I'd become through that crucible was someone I respected. Someone who'd learned to advocate for himself, to build community, to transform personal trauma into broader understanding. The support group would meet tomorrow. We'd sit in our circle and share our weeks, our struggles, our small victories. Someone would make a dark joke about pain scales and we'd all laugh, the kind of laughter that came from shared understanding rather than mockery. Lindsay would text me later, checking in, maintaining the connection we'd rebuilt. Mom would call this weekend with an article about new research. Dad would forward a documentary about chronic pain. They'd keep trying, keep learning, keep choosing to be present even when my reality made them uncomfortable. And I would continue forward, managing pain and building a life worth living despite it. The wheelchair wasn't a symbol of defeat. It was a tool that enabled freedom, movement, participation. My condition wasn't who I was, but it had shaped who I'd become. As I pulled into my apartment complex and prepared for the careful process of transferring from car to wheelchair, I felt something close to contentment. Not happiness exactly, not the absence of pain or struggle. But satisfaction with the life I'd built, the relationships I'd repaired, the understanding I'd fought to achieve. The reunion 4 years ago had ended with me on the ground, surrounded by laughter. This reunion ended with me going home to a life I'd constructed piece by piece, surrounded by people who'd learned to see me clearly. That transformation didn't erase the pain of what came before, but it redeemed it. Made it meaningful. And in the end, meaning was all anyone could ask for. The chance to turn suffering into growth, isolation into connection, dismissal into understanding. I'd done that. We'd done that together, my family and I, through hard conversations and genuine effort and the willingness to admit when we were wrong. The path forward would continue to be challenging. Chronic pain didn't disappear because family dynamics improved. But I'd walk that path, or roll it, with support instead of skepticism. With people who'd learned to believe me the first time instead of requiring proof. With a sister who'd transformed cruelty into compassion through genuine self-examination. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. When we witness someone's suffering, we face a choice. We can dismiss what we don't understand, protecting our comfort at the cost of their dignity. Or we can lean into the discomfort of belief, offering the validation that transforms isolation into connection. The families that matter aren't the ones who never cause harm, but the ones who do the painful work of repair when they do. And those of us who suffer invisibly must remember that advocating for our reality isn't selfishness. It's survival. Our voices matter. Our pain is real. And we deserve to be believed the first time we speak.